Hello everyone and welcome to my one-take film review. One person, one take straight out of the cinema, an attempt to stay true to the spontaneous, immersive experience of movie-going. The film I just saw today was Megan 2.0. I have a soft spot for films about robots and technology because I'm constantly intrigued by ways in which we try to tell these stories anew, try to say something new with this material. I think the best example of recent years is Ex Machina by Alex Garland, but there have been some other interesting efforts over the years. I think Megan, the original, was actually one of the best because what it did was it recognized that in order to tell a story about robots, you really have to tell a ghost story. What is frightening about AI is in some ways already familiar to us from the genre of the ghost story. It's the fact that this is something like a human being, but not. That source of uncanniness and otherness that is normally provided by death, that causes people in films to make robotic movements, like in zombie movies, where the means of locomotion is part of the horror, whether they walk or stumble or suddenly, as in 28 Days Later, run. These are all forms of locomotion that remind us of the human, but are also a bit robotic or a bit weird or off. So the robot is really an undead person. And Megan recognised that, the original, and told that story with aplomb. It was funny, it was clever, and it knew what it was doing. It knew it was a small, gutsy little fighter of a movie, basically. And Jared Johnston, who's a very good director, whose first film was Housebound, which is again a wonderful blend of horror and comedy, very inventive and ingenious, here tries to do a tentpole blockbuster version of Megan, where what was kind of a witty little movie becomes a sprawling, let's save the world kind of summer blockbuster. I don't think it can carry those ambitions because I don't really think Johnston's capable of taking that material that seriously. I mean, there are certain points where some of the witty dialogue highlights some of the plot holes in a way that makes you think, is this metafiction, or does he just not like the material very much? Is there a sense in which we're being shown the limits of this script by the director? I kind of felt that was the writer director was saying, yep, I know. I've had to shave off all the interesting edges to my writerly personality in order to make it in Hollywood. Hey, I guess I'm the robot. And I felt like that was kind of the underlying meaning of this entire film. As we watch it, it's generic beats. It starts off with Alison Williams, very good in the main role as a now regretful kind of computer programmer who's created this monster, who then has to see a new and more horrific version of the AI doll rise and try to take over the world. And of course, what are you going to do if you're Alison Williams but deploy the original villainous doll, who at least is the devil you know, against the horrific newcomer? It's an old story, it's there in Terminator, it's more recently there in Jurassic World, where you get the trusty old T-Rex and Velociraptor facing down the newfangled monster. So it's everything about this movie, in other words, falls back on generic beats. But I think what it really is interesting for is the way it points to ways of telling stories about AI. I am very fond of the techniques that have been used up till now, which are the techniques of ghost stories and thrillers that basically go back to very old forms of storytelling and very old forms of fear. What I thought was interesting in this is there's a point about halfway through where Alison Williams is using Megan, her original antagonist, as a way to now fight the new horrific robot that's risen to take over the world. And she unleashes Megan very reluctantly. And what she does is she imprisons her in initially a tiny little kind of Teletubby style toy. So Megan is ludicrously trapped inside this ridiculous little object and is trying to control events from within there. But in order to fight the new monster, Megan is going to have to be given a better shell, and she's going to have to develop and grow. And what happens as a result is that Megan ends up entering the smart system of the house in which Alison Williams' character is living. She ends up speaking to her from the walls, speaking to her from inside pictures, speaking to her from inside computers and other objects. So what happens is that Megan ceases to have, for certain parts of the film, a human shape and personality, and instead becomes a system. And the great horror of AI that this film glances on and discovers for us as filmgoers and as listeners to these kinds of stories, the horror it discovers is that AI is dispersed. It has no center and no edge. It is not actually a person, and any effort to turn it into one is an illusion. It's an anthropomorphic illusion. In fact, AI is systemic. It's more like something that goes wrong inside a system, from terrorism that could sabotage a system to, old familiar horrors like cancer, which exist within a system and which undermine it from within. In other words, AI, despite the fact it starts with the first letter of the alphabet and then has the personal pronoun as the next letter, therefore it feels like the biggest, most boastful statement of identity. In fact, it doesn't have our form of identity. It doesn't exist in our form. It exists within a dispersed and suspended form. And this is something that the film plays with quite interestingly as we watch battles occur between the new and the old robot, using the systems of the city, using electricity, using computing, using wires, using networks. I feel like the first great horror movie of our era, well, it wasn't horror, but it pointed towards it, was The Social Network. It was a film that showed us how you could be destroyed from within, actually from without, by a system that you've created. And now we are living in that horror movie, and we're living inside that network, and that has been given form, shape, and story by Jared Johnston in this film. Of course, at the end, the still overarching system of Hollywood, in the case of a filmmaker like Jared Johnston, has to reassert itself, and we get an incredibly boring final act in which we play out a superhero movie ending. But that's not really the film he's made. The film he's made is a new effort to imagine how to dramatize the horror that is AI. The truth of the matter is, we still have not cracked the code. We've still not worked out how to give dramatic form to this new absent presence in our world. I think that the reality of the situation is we won't be able to do that until it's AI making the movies. And we're very close to that horror, so perhaps we should reflect on that. But thanks very much, and I hope you have a pleasant day.